My dad has always been too nice of a guy, like a pushover. I'll just start the story with that. I don't say it for no reason. We live in uptown Chicago. We don't have a huge family, so our Thanksgiving and Christmas gatherings are always small, like less than 6 people. This was Thanksgiving night of last year, 2019. Dinner was almost done already. My dad was picking up some last-minute foods like stuffing and cranberry sauce at the corner store since we didn't have any. My mom and I started setting the table, while my brother and grandparents sat at the table. My dad finally returned, but with more than just stuffing and cranberry sauce though. He brought someone along with him. It was this middle-aged, dirty-looking man in a green puffer jacket and black pants. He looked homeless. My dad introduced the man as Stefan, and said he would be joining us for dinner tonight.
Nationwide is so much more than a great insurance company. They're one of America's largest financial services companies.
My brother and I exchanged surprised, uncomfortable looks. Then my mom and I did the same. As my dad started preparing the stuffing, he was telling us how he met Stefan alone in the cold streets, and said we as a Christian family should do the right thing and invite him into dinner, as no one should be alone on Thanksgiving. My grandma invited the man to sit with us. I could tell my mom wasn't comfortable with this as she whispered stuff in my dad's ear. Too late now though, the man was already seated at the table. Good thing I didn't sit next to him because I could smell his clothes from across the table. I didn't understand what my dad was thinking with this. When all the food was finally on the table, everyone sat down and we did our prayer. My brother and grandma attempted to hold hands with Stefan, but he didn't grab their hands back. I low-key watched him as we all prayed, and he just sat there, his eyes bulgingly wide, his mouth not moving. He just sat there like he didn't want to be there. After the prayer, we all began to eat, and at least 3 of my family members tried talking to him at some point. He didn't seem friendly at all though. His responses were very dry and one-wordish. It made the dinner a little uncomfortable. I didn't know what my dad saw in this man or why he felt comfortable bringing him into our home. I get trying to help the needy, but there was another way to do it than this. He helped himself to some food, but even the way he ate was really messy. Like his fingers were really greasy, some food got in his hair. It wasn't pleasant to watch. Now you may think I'm just trash-talking a homeless person, so let's move past that. Eventually Stefan said, "Excuse me, I gotta go to the bathroom." My dad pointed him in the direction of the bathroom, which was down the half flight of stairs down the hall to the left. He got up, not saying thank you, and followed the directions. Once we were sure he was out of earshot, my mom and grandparents started asking questions like what the hell is wrong with my dad bringing that man in here? My dad whispered that he felt terrible and wanted to do something right. My mom questioned how we were going to get him out of here now. My dad insisted that we were being good people though, and that we'd agree eventually. We continued eating, till my brother asked, "Where is he? He's been gone a while." We all agreed it was strange, so my dad went down the stairs to the bathroom to look. He came back up a few seconds later saying he wasn't in the bathroom. My grandmas looked very distressed as my grandpa started cursing in Italian. My brother, my dad, and I started checking the whole apartment. My dad was calling Stefan's name the whole time. We checked all the bedrooms, all the closets. Somehow he wasn't anywhere. However, the window in my parents' room was open, enough for someone to climb through. So we assumed the obvious. My mom came in yelling at my dad that this is what happens for him being stupid and letting a potentially dangerous person into our home. We all had to agree, sadly. My dad closed the window, and we tried to go about the rest of our dinner normally. But of course, the whole time we talked about the bizarre encounter. After dinner, we had dessert. Then eventually my grandparents left. The 4 of us cleaned up the table and dishes, and a couple hours later, everyone dispersed to their rooms for bed. I'm being very loose with the time frame because this was almost a year ago, but I believe it was another hour later that I finally turned off my TV for bed. The silence in the room allowed me to hear it. The breathing. I heard it in my room, not my breathing. I was frozen stiff. I didn't even want to move or sit up. I didn't know where exactly in the room it was coming from. I just looked for the door to my room, trying to sum up the courage to run. I heard the faintest shuffling sounds, like of the fabric of a jacket, and I heard, almost in my ear, "Shh," and a hand pressed down on my neck. That's when the scream I'd been building up exploded out of my mouth as I literally sprang out from the bed and into the hall calling for my dad. Everyone came out from their rooms and looked down the hall toward my room when I said Stefan's in there. Shockingly, Stefan stepped out from my room, looked at us, and walked out the front door as my dad yelled at him to get out. Of course, without getting physical because he's a big softie. Stefan was long gone by the time police finally showed up. The police said the important thing was that he left and none of us were hurt, and now just to make sure to lock the door and windows. They took our description of Stefan and they left. I like to think my dad learned his lesson from that. You can't trust everyone you meet.
While the Who's of Whoville laughed and made cheery, the Grinch hatched a plot to make their season more dreary. Dill pickle seasoning on fries, knitted Argyle stockings. That'll sure make for a shocking unboxing. The new Grinch meal, now at McDonald's. At participating McDonald's while supplies last. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
For Black Friday a few years ago, I went to Best Buy. Well, technically it was midnight the night before Black Friday. My local Best Buy is always open late the night before Black Friday. I went with my best friend Taylor to look for a new laptop and maybe whatever other stuff caught my eye. We split off to look for our own things. While browsing the laptop section, someone in a blue Best Buy shirt approached me asking if I needed help. I gave him specific specs I was interested in, and he started looking around with me. He showed me one laptop he claimed he really liked, then asked me what it was I'd be doing with the laptop. I found it to be a slightly odd question, but maybe it was part of his sales pitch. I said just for school and general web browsing kind of deal. After this point though, he seemed more interested in me rather than helping me. Like he was asking a bunch of personal questions like where I'm from, where I go to school, etc. I don't want to sound self-absorbed, but I do get a decent amount of male attraction when I go out. Anyway, I started realizing he seemed to be hitting on me, and I found him overall creepy, so I reminded him politely about the laptop and that I was in a hurry. He was relentless though. He actually asked for my phone number after that. I made it clear to him I was uninterested. Luckily I locked eyes with Taylor, who happened to be walking over, and I mouthed the word help to her. She understood, and she came over and called my name, saying, "Come in, hurry." I said, "Sorry, I have to go," to the creepy guy, and followed Taylor away. We walked to the other side of the store. I told her I didn't want to see that guy again. He was obsessive and creepy and didn't get the hints. We left the store after that with plans of going shopping elsewhere tomorrow. We were both starving though, so we went to the nearby diner, which is open 24/7. We sat at a booth and looked at the menu. The place was practically empty at this hour, except for a lone man sitting at the bar, seemingly looking at the menu as well. His back was to me. I didn't notice him there 5 minutes earlier. He was in a gray jacket, but I recognized his hair. I whispered to Taylor to look at him. As we looked at him, he tried to subtly turn to look at us, but when he realized we were already staring, he looked away. It was him, the Best Buy worker. "Oh my God, he followed us," I whispered. "Let's go," I said, and we got up and left the diner. We hurried to my car and I drove us home to my house as fast as I could. Taylor was sleeping over that night. To put it short, eventually there were 3 slow knocks on the living room window. We both shrieked and didn't know what to do. "My apartment is on the bottom floor." "It's him," we kept saying. We went to the window, but oddly couldn't see outside, like total blackness. The view of outside was blocked. We were too creeped out. We had to call the cops. When we got a knock on the door from police, we immediately felt safer. So it turned out the reason we couldn't see out the window is because a shirt was hung over the window, blocking view in or outside. Not just any shirt, a blue Best Buy shirt. Pinned to the shirt was a post-it note that said, "I don't work at Best Buy, bitch." So the police recommended I file a harassment charge. But the problem was I didn't know his name or who it was. They said I could get a lawyer and get the surveillance footage from Best Buy to find the guy, but it sounded like a lot of work. I let it go, but I stayed at Taylor's apartment for a few days. I still can't believe that guy followed us all the way to my house. Some people are dangerously crazy.
work at a Montessori school, which is basically just a really small school with 3 to 4 very tiny classrooms for children. Where I work, the classrooms are on the lower level of a church, and my job is to clean them every night after the classes. It would only take me around 2 hours to clean all the rooms, but I work the closing shift at a nearby grocery store as well, so I wouldn't get to the school until around 10:30 most nights. Something you should also know is that the church shared a parking lot with an old people's home directly across from it. I will admit, a lot of weird and creepy things have happened at this school, but the weirdest had to be what happened just a couple weeks back. I had just finished cleaning the second room and was beginning to move all of my cleaning supplies to the third room. It was probably around 11:45 at this time, which meant that I was running a little bit behind, so I was trying to rush. As I crossed the hallway to the third room, I hear loud bells echoing throughout the church upstairs. Someone had rung the doorbell. Nobody has ever shown up during any of my shifts before, as it was always so late, and both the school and the church were closed hours before. I was a little nervous, so I slowly made my way up the stairs and towards the door. It was one of those wooden doors with big tinted glass windows on it. Trying not to be seen, I looked around the corner to see who was outside. I saw an old woman, probably in her 70s or 80s, just standing right outside the door. I backed away before she could notice me. I decided to ignore it and figured she had just wandered off and one of the attendants at the old people's home would pick her up. I started my cleaning again, mopping the floors of the room. But only a few minutes later, I heard banging echo through the halls. I jumped a little. Then I stopped to listen. The banging stopped for a few seconds and was followed by the old lady yelling from outside. It was hard to make out what she was saying, so I made my way back upstairs, where I could hear clearly what she was calling out for. She was calling for someone named Abby. She was just repeating her name over and over. As I got closer to the door, the woman stopped. I looked around the corner and she wasn't outside the door anymore. It was a little bit unsettling, but I assured myself that someone probably came and got her after they heard her yelling. I turned around and began my way back, when out of the corner of my eye, I see the old lady staring at me through the window right beside the stairs. She looked me in the eyes and yelled, "Abby, help me." Her eyes were wide open and her hair was long and gray. I immediately ran back downstairs and locked myself in one of the classrooms. I took my phone out and called the old people home next door, and I told them the situation, asking if maybe she'd wandered away from them. The lady on the line told me that everyone was there, and they would have noticed if anyone had left, as they're required to check out. She said that she would double check with security and to stay on the line just in case. While I waited, I heard banging on the window upstairs, and a few seconds later, the woman on the phone describes the old lady's features and asks if that was her. I said yes and mentioned that she keeps yelling for someone named Abby. There was a small moment of silence. "Ma'am?" I spoke softly back into the phone. She replied, warning me not to approach her and to find somewhere safe to stay until they could have someone come out and get her. Obviously, this just made me even more terrified. I stayed in the room, still listening to the repeated banging on the window from upstairs. Now, this building was pretty old, and I wasn't sure how long those windows would hold if she kept banging on them. Eventually, I heard some male voices from outside, and after what sounded like a struggle, they left. I sat there for a few minutes, just thinking about what had happened. Then I got up and finished cleaning the rooms. The whole situation felt pretty unreal, and knowing that the old lady is in the building across from me still makes me nervous. I never found out who Abby was, or why the lady was trying to get into the church, but I'm just glad I never opened the door. I used to work the register at a local gas station, though I've since left as there were a lot of strange things that happened when I would work overnight. But this one situation in particular will stick with me forever. I only worked the night shift a few days a week, usually Friday and Saturday. My shifts were usually boring and honestly just a game of trying to stay awake. The only thing I really had to do was stock the shelves and occasionally help a customer. I would get a lot of drunk people or families on road trips, and sometimes even whole groups of friends. But for the most part, it was pretty quiet. On this night, it was around 2 a.m., and I hadn't had a customer in over an hour, so I was starting to doze off a little bit. The desk was around the corner from the entrance, and there was a bell on the door that rang when somebody walked in, so usually falling asleep wasn't too big of a deal. I woke up after a few minutes, hearing the bell ring, and a few seconds later, saw a customer walk in. He looked like a typical 30-year-old man that would come in for some beer or a snack. He walked around for a little bit, down every aisle, looking at everything. Now, I've worked in retail for a long time, and I know what it looks like when someone is looking for something specific. But this man had nothing in mind. He was just looking at the shelves, browsing the store. During the day, this is pretty normal, but people don't usually come in at 2 a.m. to browse the gas station shelves. I looked out the window to my left to see if he was filling up his car and was maybe just passing the time, but there were no cars outside. A couple minutes went by before he eventually looked over at me and said thanks, and then walked out. I didn't know what to make of that, but I just figured he stole something small and was just being a dick about it. The whole situation left my mind after a few minutes, and I started to get really tired again. This time, I decided to grab my cart of items to stock and start filling up the shelves to pass the time. I'm not really sure how long I was stocking for, maybe 20 minutes, before I saw a man show up at the end of the aisle I was stocking. It made me jump a little, as I never heard the door ring. This guy was wearing a large hoodie and dark clothes. I pretty much knew right away that something was very off. The man continued down to the back of the store, and I immediately went back to behind the counter. I tried not to stare, but I noticed that as he walked down the aisles, he wasn't looking for anything. He was just browsing. It clicked in my head immediately that this was the same guy from just a little bit ago, but he had changed clothes for some reason. I also came to the realization that he probably came initially to scope out the place before doing whatever he planned on doing. I started to panic in my head. The man began to come down the aisle closest to the counter, and I could see something heavy in his front hoodie pocket. I made a split-second decision to try and prevent any further escalation, and I said, "Welcome back, sir. Need help finding anything?" He made eye contact with me, and I could tell he knew exactly what I was trying to do. He approached the counter, not saying a word, and brought his hand out of his pocket, revealing a small handgun. Then he grabbed a small pack of gum from beside the counter and placed it in front of me. He said, "Just this." Confused and in shock as to what was happening, I didn't even react for a few seconds before eventually scanning the gum nervously. Still holding the gun, he took out $1 from his jean pocket and threw it on the counter, then said thanks and walked out. I was in total shock, trying to wrap my head around what just happened. I ended up reporting the situation to the police and calling my manager, who didn't pick up. No updates ever came out of the situation, but it had me on edge for the last few months that I worked there. I'm still unsure of what really happened that night, or what the man's intentions were, but honestly, I'm glad I never found out. I work as a cybersecurity analyst for a large office company in my town. I had just started off my first job in the field, so of course I had to work the shift that nobody else wanted to. Working overnight wasn't as terrible as I thought, though. It was actually pretty peaceful. My job mainly consisted of looking through log files to make sure nothing sketchy happened while the rest of the crew was sleeping. This meant that I was always pretty much alone in the office building for several hours. I'd fall asleep pretty often, as staring at a screen for hours on end in the middle of the night was hard on my eyes, and with nobody there to keep me company, staying awake wasn't very easy. I started setting soft alarms on my phone to go off every hour, just to make sure that I didn't sleep through my entire shift. I had been working this job for about 4 months when this happened, and I actually still work there now. It was a regular night, and my coworker had just finished his shift at 12 o'clock and left the building. A couple minutes later, I got up and started the coffee machine, and then I walked down the main hallway to do a general check for anyone still in the building. This was my regular routine, just to make myself more comfortable. I sat back down at my desk and took my phone out to turn on the alarms, and then continued on with my work. It was about 20 minutes later when I realized I had never heard the coffee machine beep that it was done, and I went to check on it. I walked down the hall to the small coffee desk and saw that there was no coffee in the pot, and then I saw that the entire coffee machine was turned off. I thought it was weird, but that's about it, and I just turned it back on and went back to my desk. As soon as I sat down, I noticed my phone wasn't where I had left it on the desk. I patted down my pockets and ran back to the coffee desk, but it wasn't there either. I played it back in my memory, and I knew for sure that I had placed it right on my desk right next to my keyboard. I started to get really freaked out and looked around frantically. The way my desk was set up, it was right in the middle of a large room with other desks and computers. I felt like I was being watched as I stood there in the middle, knowing that someone else had to be in there with me. Nervously, I called out in a shaky voice to my friend, really hoping that it was just him playing some dumb prank on me. I waited for a few seconds, but there was no reply. As I stood by my desk, another few seconds went by before I heard a soft shuffling coming from behind a desk in the far corner. Almost immediately after, my phone alarm rang from the opposite corner of the room. My first thought was that there were probably 2 unknown strangers in the room with me, and I instantly started running for the door out of the building. I didn't hear any footsteps behind me as I made it out, but I didn't take any chances. I ran across the street to a neighboring gas station, and I called 911 with their phone to report the unknown people in our office building. The police arrived quicker than I thought and searched the building. They brought out a man after only a few minutes, though I didn't recognize him at all. They also retrieved my phone, which they found behind some boxes in the corner of the office. He was also found with a small knife in his pocket. The next day, we got a lot more information about what really took place. Apparently, the man was an old employee who had been fired recently before I started working there. The man told the police he was trying to scare me in order to get me to leave the building so that he could take back his company laptop. Apparently, he had information that he wanted from it. At least, those were his claims. It all seems really weird to me, and I'm not sure if I even trusted his reasonings to breaking in, but my coworkers did say that they remembered the guy, and he was definitely a little bit strange. I'm glad I got out of there when I did, though, because I'm not sure what would have happened if his plan didn't work, and I chose to stay in the building.